So today we're here with our two favorite guests of the day, Diego and Juliet. Diego's with Logan City Fire, and Juliet is a clinician for families and couples here in Logan, North Logan even. So let's just get started with a little bit of introductions. Juliet, why don't you kick us off and just tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your practice, and kind of maybe what got you into doing family therapy.
Sure. Okay. Thanks for inviting me to be here today, Brent. I am over here in North Logan, not too far away, with Fortitude Family Couples and Family Therapy. So Fortitude has been in North Logan for we're coming up on a year under the Fortitude name, but I've been working in the Valley for about 5 or 6 years as a marriage and family therapist. So I love working with couples and parents and, of course, individuals a lot in a variety of circumstances. And so it's really great to be working with the first responders and the unique challenges that they face and that their families face also. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. Tell us a little bit, because I know that there's lots of different areas you can specialize in therapy. What made you kind of go the family route?
Yeah, the family route looks at individual functioning through the whole system. So that's just kind of aligns with my worldview, where a psychologist or a social worker might look at individual functioning through an individualistic lens. I really look at the systemic lens. So I'm going to look at how our families and how they interact with each other affects our individual mental health, as well as our jobs and our coworkers and all of those systems that we're in, of how that influences our mental health. So it's really just my worldview, I guess, is why I was interested in studying marriage and family therapy, because I think that we are not individuals. We are relational people. We're relational creatures, and so we need each other.
Yeah, no, I love that. And, it goes right in line with kind of part of our mission statement is what we do with Firefighter Support is mental wellness, physical health, and human connection. And I think
Awesome.
That last one is so, if you had to pick one, it's like if you have good human connection, it seems like the other ones almost take care of themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think that's really great. Diego, give us a little background on you and kind of anything that would help us get to know you a little bit better.
Cool. So my name is Diego. Thanks for having me. I've been with Logan Fire since 2014. I started volunteering in 2005 for a local fire department, and I just loved it. So I decided to make this move. I've really enjoyed it. Every day on shift is something new, which is right up my ADHD alley. So I really enjoy it. We have great people, and it's really an honor to be able to help and be there for our brothers and sisters. So I think it's great, and I think what we're doing here is amazing. So I'm grateful for the ability to participate and for clinicians to be involved with this. So I've got 2 boys, and I am divorced. I've got, I think, for four years. So there's some added challenges there, but my boy's mom and I are able to co-parent really well. So that's been really helpful for the kids. And I recently, probably 2 years ago, I took a huge interest in parenting and how to become a better parent as I dove into, my own trauma and the roots thereof. I started learning about, just what I can do to be able to help my kids have, a better outcome than maybe some of us have had. So I think this is awesome, and I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, no, again, appreciate you guys taking the time, because middle of the day and coming over isn't always easy. And I don't know, I know Diego would never admit to this, but he's almost a living legend of parenting on our fire department. So quick story, and I don't know if you even know that this is being widely spread, but one of your previous crew members, Paul Olson, tells this story about how he's going on a hike with his kid, and he'd always get frustrated because they were just all over the place and not sticking to the trail. And then he talks about, how Diego gave him this advice. Hey, Paul, just let them go wherever they want. Like if they want to go straight up the mountain, let them go straight up the mountain. And then on their next experience or whatever, they did that. And Paul just talks about how much of a game changer that was for him to let go of just that little thing. And then that memory with his boys was awesome. And so there you go. You've already impacted the whole department. That story keeps getting spread. But then following your Instagram page too, and just all the effort that you've taken and putting together these kind of tips for dads, because not that dads need extra help, but they probably need a lot of extra help.
Yeah, we all need helps, moms and dads.
Yeah, well, it seems like, and maybe let's start right there, Juliet, with how would you define maybe the role of parents? Like, what is their job? And to give a little context to that, I think sometimes we revert to my job is to protect any bad thing from ever happening to my kids, and even though that sounds a little silly as I say it out loud, but our actions seem to manifest, that's my only role. When they get hurt, I do this. When they get in trouble, I do this. Or if they speak out of line or say something rude or whatever, my job is to prevent bad things, right? But help correct that poor way of thinking.
That is an impossibility, first of all. But really, our job as parents is not to protect our children from experiencing bad things or having hard feelings. Our job is to be a safe place for them to experience those hard things, right? So I think, and you guys can share me what you feel on this, but I think that a parent is just really, going to be that safe place to help our children as they grow and discover who they are going to be. So your story is a great example of going up the mountain. We can't control exactly how they're going to get up the mountain, but we can sure help them, navigate it safely, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting when we do things like go on hikes, and we have kind of our own agenda, right, of what we want to accomplish and what we believe is going to be best for our family. And oftentimes that might not be the case, right? We may want to go on this hike and stick to this trail, but the kids are like, yeah, I've been on this trail before, but like, look at that little one. Or, hey, look at this stream or this rock, or just let them have fun, right? I heard this quote the other day about how our kids are, we're not to like create our own version of them. We need to let them do their own thing and support them as they do that, safely, obviously, but they're going to have their own personality, their own thing. We don't need a carbon copy. We just need to support them in what they want to do.
So where would you guys put the balance of allowing them to kind of do their own thing, but at the same time, like, you're the parent and you have to, have those teaching moments of, hey, that probably wasn't the best decision, or maybe we shouldn't, jump from the couch and knee our brother in the stomach, or, like, because, I think there's that room you want to give them to explore, but then also, like, where do you draw the line of discipline, and so that you don't have just totally unruly children?
Yeah, I think that line is constantly evolving and changing. As parents, we kind of lose our influence, our circle of influence changes throughout parenthood, right? So when we have our newborn, we really get to control everything that they're exposed to. And as they get older, and if for sure, it happens a lot faster than we think, even as they're getting into schools and everything, our circle of influence changes. And I think we have to be willing to recognize when that's changing and to not continue to try to, like you said, to just dictate what these little people or these bigger people are doing. So I think it evolves. I think that line changes. I don't know if that really answers your question of when of course we need to keep them safe. So I think that's where discipline comes in. But
yeah, and it's probably different per child too, right? Like, it's not like there's one line that makes sense for everybody, but maybe it's just a constant pursuit of trying to find the balance. I don't know.
Yeah, and you have 3 now, right?
So yeah, 10-year-old, 6-year-old, and a 3-month-old.
So you're already learning how children are also different from each other, and what worked on your oldest is not necessarily the same with your second son, right?
Yes, we're learning the hard way every day that it's not the same.
Yeah, for sure.
So how old are your boys, Diego?
9 and 5.
9 and 5. And so how's the dynamic between them, and how, and kind of go off that a little bit, how different are they, and what have you learned from your 9-year-old to your 5-year-old?
Yeah, they're very different. Very different. My 9-year-old is maybe not quite as active, a little bit more impulsive at times. My 5-year-old is super active, but is able to kind of manage emotions a little better than the 9-year-old. So that there's kind of some different tactics I have to take with each one of them. The older one I've got to be a little more careful with because his emotions run a little warmer than the 5-year-olds. And so, like I said, they both have their own little personality, their own way of being. But as far as discipline goes, I think there's some really important things that we can do when addressing something that we don't like or we don't approve of. We can use, like things like positive opposites. You're probably familiar with positive opposites, instead of saying, if your kid's repeatedly asking you to, hey, can I play on the tablet? Can I play on the Xbox? and they've already used all their screen time for the day, instead of saying no over again, just give them a positive opposite and say, hey, you know what? Why don't we go do X, Y, Z, and give them a list of things. Why don't you go with your little brother to the park? Why don't we go for a bike ride? Why don't we go for a walk? Why don't we do some art? Rather than hearing that constant no and making them feel smaller every time, let's just give them other options. And, if we have to correct a behavior, they only need to hear it once. We may feel like they need to hear it over and over again.
I was just going to argue with that. I'm pretty sure my kids have to hear it at least 10 times before it enters their brain.
Well, we feel that way, right? Like, we might feel like if I don't say this 10 times, they're never going to get it. When in truth, all they need to hear it is one time, and then we drop it. And if we do that over and over again, it will eventually, the behavior will correct itself, I promise. We saw a therapist for one of my kids, and she actually put my ex and I through a class first to teach us how to correct the behavior, because there's no way you can teach a kid to fix that behavior in 1 hour sessions, a week for 6 weeks. So we went through the class and we learned a whole bunch of things that have helped change certain behaviors. And those are just a couple of things that were super effective in being able to make that change.
Yeah, I love that you pointed that out, because I think that parenting is more about the parent's behavior than it is about the child's behavior. And I think we kind of flip that a lot. We are constantly thinking about, what is my child doing, or what is, what are they doing wrong? And the more we can focus on our own behavior and regulate our own emotions and, develop our own emotional regulation skills, then we will be able to co-regulate with our children, which is how children learn to regulate themselves. So I love that.
Yeah.
I just wanted to drop my kids off at the therapist and have them fix everything. Like, come on.
Yeah.
That was my initial thought. It didn't work.
Dang it.
No, sorry. You got it. You got to put in the work also.
So if you think of it this way, if you want to fix their behavior towards whatever, work on fixing your reaction to that behavior, and the problem will solve itself over time. Because oftentimes our reaction to that behavior only reinforces the behavior. So work on your reaction and how you're reacting to that thing, and maybe fix that. Take a step back and look in the mirror a little bit as to how you're handling whatever it is that they're doing.
Yeah, probably even
Absolutely.
including not reacting at all. Right?
Exactly.
Like, I think in one of your little episodes you talked about the behavior we ignore as often the good things they're doing, because we're sitting back to ourselves and, my boys are sharing today. They're not fighting. This is so nice. But we kind of keep that thought to ourselves versus pointing out to them like, hey, guys, I really appreciate how much you guys are getting along. But the second they start fighting, it's like, oh, you two better stop that right now.
Yeah, we're right on.
Video games for a month,
Negative reinforcement is still reinforcement, right? When we are really giving a lot of attention to the negative behavior, we are still reinforcing it. So we might want to ignore some of that behavior and really reinforce the behavior that we want to see more of.
Yeah. And, I think, we kind of started, and it's almost seems like parenting is just this vague, daunting task with no real guidelines. But I love the positive opposites, and paying attention to the reinforcement behavior. What are some other things that you guys have found that are like almost like little tips or tricks that, just little tweaks to our change, like our behaviors, or little parenting tips that you found have worked really well?
So I think that seeing parenting as a relationship and less about a task is kind of what I heard you start to say. I say maybe that's the paradigm shift that we need to change a little bit, that there's not a perfect way, that we're not doing it right, but we are looking towards that relationship and what's going to be healthy for them and for us. But I know you want more specific little tips.
No, well, and even that, right? That's just the whole mindset change. And I hadn't connected that until you just said it. But yeah, I think when you look at parenting as a task, it's a never-ending checklist that you're never going to get done.
That you could do it right or wrong, and that's really distressing. And so...
But yeah, just looking at it as a relationship, that's an ongoing, that's not necessarily black and white. How is this relationship progressing? Is it moving towards a healthier place or and so I think that in itself is a good way to just shift our thinking about how we view ourselves as parents.
Yeah.
And that was, it's probably one of my biggest things, and I think probably a lot of guys are similar on the department, is, sometimes as firefighters, I feel like we see things that are hard at work, and we associate maybe shame or guilt or trauma with some of those things. But man, when I look back on my experiences, the most shame and guilt I have are associated with my parenting. When I've been short with my kids, or I've, got home from shift and was just totally distant, and they were excited to tell me about their day at school, and I just wasn't ready for it, or whatever, and I didn't react appropriately. Like, those live with me, I feel like, for a lot longer than almost any call I've been on. I don't know if you can relate there, but
Yeah, for sure.
but it's tough, and I think if you have that desire to be a good parent, but then you feel like you're always falling short, and you just kind of have this dark cloud of shame that's following you around as a dad.
Yeah, the whole relationship thing, that's very important, because honestly, I believe that our kids want nothing more than to have a good relationship with us. And it's kind of up to us to make sure that happens, right? It's up to us to help cultivate it and push it along. And, some of the things that we can do to help that is, like you were saying, we may come home from a shift and we're just exhausted, and done for. So before we can help fill anybody else's bucket, we got to fill our own. So take your time to rest, to do whatever it is that you do for self-care, to be able to fill your bucket so that you can be there for them. And another thing that we need to be conscious of is when they do come up to us and tell us something super exciting in their life, oftentimes if it means a lot to them, they're going to be super excited. They're going to be tugging on your arm. They're going to be just waiting to get it out. And like, let's check in with ourselves and see how we're reacting when they do that. Like, are we getting down to their level, really listening and putting ourselves in their story and really valuing what they're saying? Because that's what's going to increase the health of that relationship and increase that bond, which is what they're after, right? And the more we do this over time, later on in life, in high school or college, or when they're adults, they're gonna feel like they have that safe space to come back to and say, hey, this just happened, I need some help, or I need advice. And I want nothing more than that, than, for my kids to be able to confide in me like that in the future. So the time is now to make that happen.
Yeah. I think, like an example I think of with that for me is, my kids love playing Fortnite, and sometimes that's a little trigger for me. It's like, man, you've been playing Fortnite all day. But, they'll make some accomplishment in the game that took a long time, or was like they've been working on it, and they're just so excited to tell me, like, hey, I got to level whatever in Fortnite, or I got this character. And my first reaction is always like, oh my gosh, it's just a video, but, just reacting differently, and not maybe setting the video game aspect aside, and just be like, hey, you were working hard on something and you did it. Wow, yeah. Good job. That's awesome. And show me, I want to see this character, or tell me what's cool about it. And in fact, I remember, so little backstory. So Juliet's husband and I used to be in a young men's group together with the leaders. And I remember Spencer telling this story about his kids where, sometimes he wanted to go outside and play or do something with them, but sometimes they just wanted him to watch them play video games. I remember him telling me, like, man, sometimes initially that was so hard, because I wanted to go out and do something, or do something else, anything else, right? But it was important to him to do something that they wanted to do. And if they want me to just watch them play video games, I'm going to do it. I'll be their cheerleader. And that's always stuck with me as a cool thing, to set aside kind of our own agenda and just, fully immerse ourselves in their world and what they're all about. But so you guys have always been shining examples.
Yeah, showing interest in the things that they're interested in is going to pay off throughout your relationship, throughout the lifetime. Like Diego was saying, that as our children age, we'll already have that, that foundation built that they'll keep turning back to us.
And how, I can't remember where I heard this, but you can tell me if it's accurate or not, but it seems like our relationship with our kids proportionally is going to be as an adult more than any other time, right? Mm-hmm. And so, but the foundation, so it's like if you do the foundation wrong as a kid, then your relationship with them as an adult is much harder to kind of develop, right? Is that true? Or
yes, we can't emphasize the importance of child development, right? We know that it really does affect all of our lives, our childhood. I don't want that to turn into us feeling like, oh, I failed, or, oh, darn it, I've already messed up. So I think the time is now. I think you use that word. It's now. Wherever you're coming from, there's always, to start building that relationship now. So if your children are young yes, let's recognize how important that is. If they're not, let's still recognize that we can change. As a therapist, I have to believe in change, or my job is really unfulfilling. So I'm an advocate for change, but we can get there.
I appreciate putting that change and hope aspect back into it, because do you have any, of course, being sensitive to any details or whatever, but any experiences or stories you could share where you just kind of were able to witness that change take place in a family? Or
Yes, I feel it's an honor to work with families, because I do see that change. And so, and I would love for Diego to tell us more about how he's been able to co-parent, because I think that's awesome that you feel like you and your boy's mom are able to do that together. So I'm not thinking of a specific example right now, except for that as we as adults are self-reflective and willing to change themselves, I think that they can change the family systems. The firefighting field is a service field, and parenting is also a service industry. So you guys are headed in the right direction to be able to be really great servants for your homes, and I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I agree. It's, as far as the co-parenting thing, I don't know. It seems to a lot of people, especially like other friends that are divorced, that what we have is kind of a fairy tale. They're maybe a little envious of the relationship that we're able to have as co-parents. And it's pretty simple. It's not about me and it's not about her. It's about the kids. Sure, there may be some things that we talk about that are a little rougher, but the kids don't need to be involved. They just need a seamless transition from, mom to dad, and we just take care of what we need to for the kids and keep them, safe and fulfilled in everything that they need. That's the bottom line. It's not about the adults. It's now about the kids. So whatever we need to do to make them a priority is always first.
And how do you feel like you were able to put aside your own, your defensiveness? We all feel that as adults. What's helped you with that transition in parenting?
I think open communication, and knowing that we'll listen to each other concerns and address those concerns as they come up rather than holding them in, something that would work really well in a marriage. Awesome. You would suggest the same thing, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
But so kind of the same thing is just open communication, listen to concerns without the sword and shield. Just because something is being said, it doesn't mean it's an attack at you. It's just how somebody is feeling, and we just need to listen. And once they're done, we can formulate a response that won't be taken as an attack. And just deliver it well. And of course, we expect the same from the other person, to just sit and listen and wait for it to end and then formulate a response rather than being reactive. In families, I think it's really important that we raise our kids in non-reactive homes. I'm not sure which book I read this in, but they mentioned how kids that grow up in reactive homes, they end up, and as they live in reactive homes, they often try to help the adults cope with their emotions, as small children. And in doing so, later on in life when they're adults and people mistreat them, they see that as an opportunity to try to fix somebody rather than looking at that as a red flag and going like, I don't want anything to do with that relationship. They instead gravitate towards that relationship because it feels familiar, And so reactive homes, not a good thing. Let's learn to communicate as partners. And also, as a single dad, I worked really hard on learning to communicate with them appropriately so that I don't create a reactive home with my kids and traumatize them in the process even further. So communication is huge. I know we all heard it before we even got married, and in high school, but I just can't emphasize it enough.
So, one thing that I think that's really hard for firefighters is our job is reactive, right? The tones go off. We have this 911 call. It's our job to react and solve the problem, get there, right? And so I think we kind of have that mindset for 48.
Yeah, for sure.
How do you turn that off? And I think, I know I'm guilty of it, but when you get home and then that, cup of orange juice gets spilled or, the fighting starts or whatever, it's go time. It's react time. Yeah. My job is to fix this. That's the tones going off, that same, fight or flight almost, and when it's really not appropriate, right? This isn't a 911 call. This isn't life but man, how do you separate those, or how do you leave that at the doorstep when you get home? and kind of shift it. And I imagine it's probably similar for, any parent that's working. They have kind of their work mindset. I think it's almost a little bit exaggerated for firefighters because it's 48 hours at a time. You eat, live, sleep in this mindset, and then it's a little different when you get home. But
Honestly, I think it comes down to self-care and taking care of yourself because, think about it. We're at the station and the tones go off and you're exhausted, you're tired, you've had a rough day for whatever reason and you haven't taken time to take care of yourself. It's going to be a crappy response from you, like, oh, not again, right? Unless it's a fire, then we're all excited. Yeah. But for everything else, we're going to be, oh, what a drag, like again, really? Where if we're taking care of ourselves and we have just kind of a more positive attitude and outlook, we may be still not super excited to go on that fall assist or whatever, but we'll react, but we'll do it correctly, in the right mindset. And that's kind of the same thing at home. If I go home and I'm just exhausted and I haven't taken care of myself or process the things that I need to process, when those things do happen, the orange juice gets spilled or big brother hits little brother or vice versa, which happens more often, I'm going to be pretty reactive, but if I take care of myself, I can take a moment, take a deep breath, and formulate an appropriate reaction to that, rather than a negative one.
Sure.
Developing mindfulness skills, which is what's going to help you with that regulation of your emotions, can be practiced even during that 48-hour shift, and probably should be, right? We can't expect ourselves to be totally different people when we get home. So, having that, even just that simple check-in of what is going on in my body. Yes, I'm noticing my rapid heart rate. I'm noticing that I am responding to this emergency in this way, and still taking that time to be aware of what's happening to your body when you are on those high stressful situations. Even when you're at the station and waiting for that, there's that kind of that anticipation that you're going to be on call at any minute, will still be helpful for you then when you get home to do what Diego's talking about for your self-care of being aware of what's going on. I am actually automatically responding in that intensity that I felt at the station a few hours ago. But this is a different situation. I can walk myself through this, that I am at home. I am safe. You can kind of ground yourself back. So, I think that those mindfulness skills can be practiced throughout both areas of your lives.
Yeah. I love that because it's not necessarily a 100% 180-degree turnaround. It's just being aware, right?
Yeah.
And kind of being intentional with what you're going to do next. Be aware of how you're feeling and be intentional about the next step, and don't let those, fight or flight response dictate the next action you're about to take. Earlier we were talking about communication, and what role would you say, or how appropriate is it to communicate with your kids about the job? Right. And I'll give you an example, and I'll just kind of put our parenting out on the lab table, and you guys can critique it all you want. But one of our kids would joke about or talk lightly about killing himself. And of course, my wife's an ER nurse, and then with all the calls we go on fire, it would send us off every single time. And I think it got to the point where he just liked getting that reaction out of us, and because of course as parents we're like, oh man, is he really just kidding, and what do we got to do, man? But having seen that firsthand in kids his age, it was really hard on both me and my wife. And eventually we just decided, what, we sat him down and we said, hey, you know what me and mom do for work, and that this is a real thing. Like when you say that, it makes us think about the real times this has happened. And I remember the look of shock on his face, but his next thing was like, people do this for real? Like, yeah, people do that for real. And so when you say that, it makes us feel this way. And we just, of course we love you and we just want to help you, but this probably isn't something you should joke about ever again. I don't know. And so we've tried to find a balance, because obviously we don't want to like dump all the trauma on them, but trying to make them aware of what we do for a living so that they at least don't put the blame on themselves. Like, oh man, dad's been up all night or mom's been up all night at work. They're probably tired. It's not my fault, but where if we don't communicate about how our job makes us feel sometimes, then maybe they put all the blame on themselves. That was our plan. I don't know if that was appropriate, but it seems like there's got to be a level of communication about what we do without scaring them or making them feel the burden of what we do either. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's sometimes And you can tell me if you feel like that's what you've done, it's common for first responders to try to keep it all inside, to not share maybe the scary things that they're exposed to. And it's really important. Families are still picking up on it, right? A first responder that develops PTSD, it is very common for family members, children, and I shouldn't say common, but it is possible for spouses and children to have secondary PTSD, not having experienced the trauma, but simply because like we were talking about, we develop our regulation skills from our parents. So they're coming home with these feelings. So I think you're hitting it on the head, Brent, that it's hard to know what, exactly, but we keep the conversation open with our children. We don't shield them from everything. We can talk about it. We invite them to the station. We let them see all the safety measures that go on of how to keep you safe. We address that they might be having anxiety about your job. We start to have it be an open conversation and age appropriate. And I think that changes. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it is very important to communicate with them about what we do, keeping some of the details to maybe age appropriate. And I don't know how we gauge that.
Yeah.
I think that's probably personal preference is important. And I'm not sure how I would have handled what you guys handled. But, if I felt like the right thing and it worked, then great, But so when my oldest boy, he was in therapy for a little while, about a year ago or so, we learned that he had a lot of anxiety. And, as we kind of tried to figure out what the anxiety was about, one of the exercises was they had him do like a list of 10 fears, right? With the worst one at the very top. And that one was dad getting hurt at work and not coming home. And I never would have thought that.
Idea.
Yeah, I never would have thought that. I thought that he really looked up to, and he still does. I thought that he just really looked up to it, and that's where it ended. But he had this legit fear that something was going to happen to me. So it was great for me to know that, because I could reassure and let him know and show him some of the safety measures and the people that I work with, and that they keep me safe, and that I will always do everything possible, to make sure I can come home. So yeah, I think communicating with them about what we do, how we do it, and how careful we all are, and how we are a family and will be there for each other is very important. And, to go along with regulation and co-regulation with our kids, we have to teach them about emotions. I feel like my generation, we didn't get that. And so we're having to learn how to regulate, how to recognize emotion as adults. And it's hard. It's hard learning about them, expressing them, and recognizing them. And so I think we'd be doing them a huge service, throughout their whole lives, if we teach them about emotions, feelings now. And, along with that, teaching them that as parents, we're not invincible and we are humans. And when we have those moments that may bring a little bit of shame, those parenting moments that, maybe we send them to a timeout and we sit back and think, we're like, that was an overreaction. That was not great. And now they're in their room or wherever feeling like they're a failure. We need to be comfortable enough to go and approach them and say, I overreacted, and I'm sorry. It shouldn't have happened. I'm not perfect, and that's okay, So emotions and feelings are huge. I think that's something that we can work on to make our lives and their lives in the future so much better. I don't know what you...
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah, it's so huge. And Brent, one thing I think you did great in your example of that was you were listening to what was being said. You weren't just ignoring these comments, but you were also noticing what it was doing to you and your wife, right? So I think that's what we learned from it. We don't know exactly what was the right response, like we say with our children, but you were noticing what was happening. You were noticing what was happening in yourself, and then that's how you kind of address those emotions. It sounds like you did just what Diego was talking about. This brings up emotions to me because have you thought of it this way? So
I'm not a total failure.
Good job.
Yes. And I just kind of want, and maybe as we wrap up here, Diego's story reminded me of another story I'd heard from a business partner that I once had. And I can't remember how the conversation started, but he said one of his most powerful memories as a child was when his dad came and apologized to him. And he said I probably didn't appreciate it as much in that moment as much as later when I look back on that. And here's this grown man, he's working his guts out for our family, took the time to apologize to my 10-year-old self because he overreacted. And he's said that stuck with me forever, and since he told me that, I was like, I could do way better at that, and it's okay to apologize and to admit to our kids that maybe we don't have it all figured out and that we do make mistakes, but we're willing to see those. And so I've tried to do that. And I've, because we've talked about a lot of things, and I think there's lots of room for people to make up all the shame and guilt they want, but if you recognize the mindset of a relationship, and part of a relationship is admitting fault, and everybody can move on, right? And so to take the time to apologize to a 6-year-old or 10-year-old, or can go probably a lot further than we think. And it seems like, man, they bounce right back. You know what may take an adult weeks to forgive, kids are ready right then to just go right back to that healthy relationship status. That's probably something we could take away as adults, is probably do that a little better. But just as we wrap up here, is there any kind of final thoughts you guys have as far as, if there was one thing every firefighter could know, or that we should walk away with feeling as a parent, or something to think about as a parent, what would you tell them?
I think that I know that there's this kind of stigma in the firefighter world that, we're big and strong and we have no weaknesses. And if we show weakness, we lose value. And I think we need to change that. We need to change that and make it the norm that we're not strong and, invincible, that we are weak at times, vulnerable, and that we have feelings and emotions, and that's okay. We need to practice that a lot more, and we need to be open with friends, family, and especially our kids. So I would say just recognize your feelings or your emotions, no matter where you're at, whether you're at home or at work, and validate them. Why am I feeling this way? And know that it's okay, that you're not going to lose value because you have a feeling. Like, it's going to be fine. And let's just be open and talk about it. It's okay. I have a lot of feelings, I've learned. So do you.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Probably. I don't know.
So that's what I would say. That's something that we ignore, try to push deep down so we can stay strong.
Favorite comedians, I think I've quoted this on here before, but man, it makes so much sense every time it comes back up. But Bill Burr says, you just take that feeling, you bottle it up, put it on your shelf, and wonder who in my life I love is going to pay for this later. Of course he says it in a funny way, but man, it's so true.
Yeah.
Like, you keep those feelings to yourself, and you're just stacking up the ammo that one day is going to be unleashed on someone you love. It's not going to be some stranger or whatever. It's going to be those closest to you is going to get the brunt of that jar exploding.
Yeah, you'll end up bleeding on somebody you love that did nothing to do.
Yeah, that didn't deserve it. But, so I think that's great. A wonderful tip, because I think you're right. And it's, unfortunately, you're not going to change overnight, but the time is now. Just start that shift of thinking, right? That it's okay to not be the Superman and to have no feelings at all and only keep those to yourselves.
Yeah, and and if we want to stay closed up and tied up to department family, your family, like, it's okay. You can start small. We have clinicians that we can see privately. Mm-hmm. Nobody has to know. And there's a great way that we have to be able to bill for that anonymously. So you can tell your friends and family that you're going to a bar or something if you want to look manly, and go talk to a clinician about whatever it is that's going on.
Shop for barbed wire.
Yeah,
something tough.
Whatever you're going to do. So, begin to normalize that a little bit and support each other as we do that. But I honestly, I'm super grateful for therapists and for the changes that I've been able to make and the things that I've recognized in my life thanks to, therapy. So, huge shout out to therapists and to therapy itself. So,
yeah, I hope that's what you're, anyone that's listening to this is hearing or feeling right now is that we are all people first, right? And if there's expectations of something, go ahead and advocate for yourself and get the support you need. And I hope that you can feel like that there's no shame in that this is very normal, that we all need each other. And sometimes that therapeutic relationship is going to be helpful. Encourage your friends to get the support they need. Encourage your family to get the support they need, and encourage yourself to also get the support you need.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm glad you brought that up because I know like our fire department peer support team has put in a ton of work to get the funds available and just as you said, Diego, the privacy available that this can be as absolutely private as you want it to be. To get on our website, you find a clinician, you can contact them directly. You don't have to go through the fire department at all. All the clinicians on the website have all the correct information they need to bill without anybody knowing. And that goes for firefighters, spouses, families, and retirees. So it's a pretty big deal. And I think that's something we're pretty proud of as a peer support team to have that big piece available for those. And the privacy, like I said, is as much as you want, but also, as peer support team members, Diego and I, and the others on the team are also there as help too. Like if you want to, not sure what a clinician visit looks like, you want to talk to somebody who's done it first, then that's exactly what we're here for. Or if you maybe don't feel like your problem is big enough for a clinician or whatever, then the peer team certainly doesn't have all the answers, but is there to help point you in the right direction, and if nothing else, just be a listening ear. So
yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
Okay, well, thanks again, guys, for being here. Appreciate your time, and I know this goes a long way for guys that are trying to get all this parenting stuff figured out. So appreciate it, and we'll see you on the next one.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.